Well, my guest today has been warning about escalation with Russia for over a decade. Gilbert Doctorow is the author of many books on Russian US relations, and he joins me today to discuss the latest in the conflict with Ukraine. Now, I've been looking forward to speaking with you a lot because I picked up your book last month, the one called Does Russia Have a Future? And it's sort of an anthology of you responding to anti Russian sentiment since 2014. As a journalist, I found this like a string of breadcrumbs to pick up in order to rewind the tape so that we can figure out how we got here. Now, you made it very clear for years you've been saying that the U.S. is using Ukraine to get a war that they want and using NATO as a pretense. You showed how Ukraine was waging war in the Donbass for $8 million per day and how Russia was reluctant to get involved, just like they have been in Latvia. In Transnistria. I never can say that easily, and yet here we are. So let's start with NATO. I want to ask you about your response to NATO because just this week, the U.S. ambassador to NATO said that next week's NATO meeting will make Ukrainians believe and feel something more substantial about their NATO membership. So that's a weird thing to say they will believe and feel something better. But can you explain why NATO is a red line for Russia? And what is the significance of Ukraine for NATO?
Let's start with the second half of that. What is the significance of Ukraine for NATO? Ukraine is on the border with Russia. It is a very short flying distance, the borders of Ukraine, from Moscow and from the other centers of European Russia. It is a remarkable platform for the United States and its NATO allies to apply pressure to Russia and try to subjugate Russia to its will. Going back to 2014, the decision within Crimea, supported by Russia, to remove itself from the Ukrainian state was an essential task for both sides, for Russia and those living in Crimea, because of the strategic military importance of Crimea, the main naval base at Sevastopol of Russia in the Black Sea, supporting the Black Sea Fleet, and the thought that this territory would come into the control of the United States, which was in the cards after the February 2014 coup d'etat staged by the United States, that was unthinkable.
Right. Just last week, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the presidential candidate, said, you know, Russia does have its own security concerns. And that's just something no one ever says in the West. Like, wait, what? They're concerned about themselves. You indicate in your book that Russia would have joined NATO themselves, except President Bush didn't want a competing superpower inside of NATO. And Russia burned its bridge by voting against the Iraq War and made themselves the enemy of the U.S. And ever since, we've had this steady diet of anti-Russian propaganda that we've all been fed, that you were documenting for years past. Can you talk a little bit about this anti-Russian diet, mentioning maybe the Sochi Olympics and, more than just Stranger Things and Russiagate, right?
Well, the basic predisposition to hold Russia in an unfavorable light has been part of American political tradition for a long, long time. The Soviet Union was, of course, the other superpower, the greatest rival of the United States for 70 years. And that fact reinforced the basic predisposition of America to dislike Russia. For a period of 10 years, Russia was cuddly, Russia was on its back, and seemed to be knocked out of the superpower ranks. That made Russia something that you could accept as having a right to exist. However, after 2000, when under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, Russia began to reconstitute itself and to get up off the ground, it quickly became apparent that Russia was not welcome anymore in the United States political community, because it was once again a rival for global leadership. So this is the basic underlying foundation for the contest. As you mentioned, there are a number of of high or low points in this last 20 years. The 2003 Iraq war, Russia's position against that war. But remember, Russia was not the only country to come out against the war. More devastating, actually, was the French decision not to support the United States in the United Nations in its seeking the Security Council approval of its planned invasion of Iraq. Now, of course, there are things that you can do to your close ally and European partner, France, and also to Belgium, and also to Germany, that are much less dramatic than what you can do to Russia. You can stop buying you can relabel French fries freedom fries. You
Yes.
can pour French champagne down the drain, but that's as far as you can get if you want to maintain your control over Europe. Russia was a different story. This 2003 resistance of Russia to the United States Iraq invasion set the countries on a path of serious confrontation. 2008, the Georgian War reinforced this confrontation, and it could have been almost as bad as what we see today in the Ukraine war, had the Turks not closed the straits to American warships and made it impossible for America to use its warships in the Mediterranean in what would have been a direct confrontation with Russia over its position in Georgia during that war. These are the flashpoints over the last 20 years. But of course, the most significant development is the one that you called out from the beginning, the dispute over the future of Ukraine. Is it going to be wholly absorbed by the EU and NATO, or is it going to be, as the Russians insist, a kind of bridge between East and West, a
Mhm.
buffer state which is neutral and not threatening?
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about Europe because as these battle lines continue to be drawn, Europe is presenting itself as like a bit character, like a, kind of goofy friend that has no opinion of its own, or at least that's how I feel as an American expat living in Europe. Over a decade ago, you predicted that Europe would do what the U.S. wanted in a conflict with Russia, but begrudgingly so and at their own peril. Can you comment on that?
Well, the Europe that I was describing back then is not the Europe of today. Today we have remarkable Europe leadership or lack of leadership. And in a press conference 2 days ago, Sergei Lavrov commented on the the European Union leaders as being неадекватные. Inadequate is a direct translation. Jackasses is getting to the essence of what he was saying.
Okay.
We have leaders in almost all of these countries who are not up to the task intellectually, in terms of historical background and strength of character. With the death of Silvio Berlusconi a couple of weeks ago, Europe lost its last man of stature. We have pygmies running the various European states, and that has played into the servile behavior of the European Union vis-a-vis the United States. But there's another factor. When the Russians moved in to Ukraine in February 2022, the European Union was stunned. It
Hmm.
was unprepared. It discovered all of a sudden that it had no armies or military forces to speak of that could face up to the Russians' capabilities.
Yeah.
Now, that is a stunning discovery, which was not foreseeable to the average person in the street or even to experts in the political commentary world, because the military budgets of all of the 27 European Union member states far exceeded, many times exceeded, the military budget of Russia. And so the question that has not been asked publicly, and certainly hasn't been answered, is where did all that money go? But the net fact was that the Europeans understood that they were a pushover for the Russian military, and they instantly all lined up, begging the United States to take charge.
Yeah. I live in Portugal, and one of the main accomplishments of Salazar was that he kept Portugal out of World War II at great personal cost. And he has since been canceled, renamed bridges, renamed roads. And there is no appetite for neutrality. It's just gone. And I don't understand it. And so, as a relatively new American expat, I've been abroad for 4 years. I don't completely understand it. Now, just today, Ukrainian foreign minister had warned that, you don't want another Angela Merkel. Don't pull that again. What do you think that means? Because Angela Merkel was keeping Ukraine out of NATO?
I think so. Angela Merkel, or Mutti Merkel, was has been widely misunderstood or misrepresented to the general public. She was said to have been close to Vladimir Putin, and everyone made reference to her childhood in East Germany, where she would have learned Russian, and people spoke of her as if she were fluent in Russian, which is nonsense. Um, but she did not completely come under United States control.
Oh,
She
that's
tried
why we
to
tapped her
steer
phone.
middle course. Yeah, she's trying to steer middle course and to save Germany, taking some nasty decisions that America was trying to push on Germany, particularly this question of recognizing Georgia and Ukraine as future NATO members. But I'd like just to step back and say that Angela Merkel is also the one who was in charge in 2012 when Germany failed to renew its large, its very broad strategic cooperation agreements with Russia. And that really was the beginning of the end of German-Russian rapprochement or close relations. So it happened under Merkel, but nothing dramatic that would call attention to you as a reader of the news.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I picked up on from your book is this Putin apologist line, which you brought out in 2014 as just propaganda to turn us away from anyone looking critically at the issue. I thought that was pretty new. And it feels like, as a Western consumer of media, that the West has successfully made it sacrilege to question the Putin is a madman line. It's just a throwaway. It's the same way we used about Saddam Hussein, even though he worked with the CIA for years. Can you talk about the success of this Putin apologist propaganda campaign?
Well, in my book, 2015 book, Does Russia Have a Future? I particularly brought this out with respect to Germany and what I saw at the Schlangenbad discussion group, a German Socialist Party think tank. Germany at that time was clearly sharing the same predisposition to treat anyone who wanted um, to hear or to consider or to disseminate Russian government thoughts on any given issue as a supporter of Putin and someone who was contaminated and outside polite society. But I'd heard this earlier in the States. In 2009, 2010, I was a visiting fellow at Columbia University, doing doing some work on the book that came out in 2010 um, on great American thinkers about international relations after the end of the Cold War. And I attended many uh, public gatherings on campus, uh, gatherings that were organized, or meetings that were organized by the Harriman Center, the Institute of Russian Studies at the time at Columbia University. And these were uniformly biased, prejudiced speakers and audience. And anyone who dared to raise a hand to just make a question
Hmm.
was roundly denounced as a stooge. there you have it. The United States took off its thinking cap and turned universities into kindergartens already in 2010. Europe followed with a very slight time lapse. The same thing I can say about neoconservatism in Europe. It is widely assumed that the following of in the EU of the values-based foreign policy and these other principles that are embedded in the neoconservatism that American political life has known so well since the 1990s, that these phenomena in Europe are borrowed, they were imposed on Europe, nothing of the sort. They have a home-developed neoconservatism, and I described that in several of the essays in the book that you're talking about. Carl Bildt was the former Swedish prime minister, was one of the very big voices in Europe in that period, 2014, 2015, and more recently also, he hasn't disappeared from the scene, spreading this neocon view, which entirely supports what NATO and the United States are doing in Ukraine now.
Well, I'll ask you just one more question, and then maybe I'll have you back some other time because, like I said, it's fascinating to me how much I felt like, oh yeah, I have been primed by this without asking questions about, all of these sort of narratives. Escalation is something you warned about. It seems to be the name of the game right now. The West just keeps escalating. Now I feel like nuclear war is the new weapons of mass destruction. It's a trump card. You throw it down and you get your way. What do you think will happen next?
Well, you've noticed at the beginning that I've been warning about where we're headed going back 10 years. But of course, the whole time I haven't been walking the pavements with a sandwich board saying the end of the world is nigh. Nothing of the sort. There have been brighter moments and darker moments. Right now, we're in a darker moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the risks which I had described in various essays are very much in front of us. The times are very perilous, and considering the geriatric patient who was in the White House, and considering the spineless leaders of Europe today, we don't have immediately in front of us political leadership prepared to cope with the risks we're facing. I'm very glad you mentioned Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I think he is one of the few bright spots in the American political horizon.
Yes. Well, I have been following along your takes at gilbertdoctorow.com, and I really appreciate that and anyone else who wants to join me in doing so. And maybe you'll come back and talk to us more about this because, like I said, once you're presented with the buffet that you've been eating of propaganda, you just start to think, well, what about this? What about Alexei Navalny or whatever? Like all of these things, what's that about? And I feel like now we have homework to do of our own, given that we've been fed something that we didn't question. So I'm doing the homework. I appreciate you helping walk me through it and bringing this to our audience. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.